the raid of Final Shape, which can be interesting, as we've talked about. It's just like, I guess the Witness is going to be the raid boss. That would make the most sense. But they've said there's going to be 7 missions in Final Shape, which is, it's a little bit anticlimactic. The biggest grand expansion is a bit like, wow, 7 missions is kind of like, is this it? They better be some really, really good missions and no strikes.
Yeah, that's...
But then they said there's going to be the raid, which is going to be the bulk of defeating the Witness. But then there's going to be another mission after the raid, which is going to be the actual conclusion. So it's not going to be like, if you don't play the raid, you won't see the conclusion of the Witness. They're basically, you can kind of read between the lines of what numerous Bungie devs have said, but they said it's not over after the raid. There'll be one final push. And then there's a lot of people speculating about, like, a big 12-player mission, or a big, kind of similar to Zavala Disciple, how after the raid there was the mission, kind of a follow-up, which is very, very successful. I think this is a play on that and also makes sense that you can't really have, similar to King's Fall, where you killed Oryx in the story and you killed him properly in the raid. This will be similar, where you probably get close to the Witness or defeat some form of him in the 7-mission campaign Final Shape, and then you've got the raid, which is actually against the Witness, and then you've got another mission after, which anyone can play. You don't need to be a raid to play, and that will be some big, huge final stand where you actually defeat the Witness.
Yeah, so here's my hope, and I'll say this before I actually get into my hope. 7 missions plus raid plus 1 final mission. That format worries me,
right? Because
7 missions for a campaign, you got to remember the campaign is the vast majority of what most people will play. Mm-hmm. Day 1 completion rates on raids and the involvement in them, it's improved, it's got higher, but the actual day 1 completion rates, especially for contest mode, very, very tough, very low. So my hope is that in 7 missions, we do get a coherent story end. Here's my hope, though, right? They've already laid out that, hey, they are taking a lot of cues from the Taken King and the way that they did the story of Oryx. And what this makes me hope is that they've tied this in with how they say that the destination is going to evolve. So here's what I think is going to happen. And I don't know this to be the case, but this is my hope. We get the 7-mission campaign, we make our way to the monolith, and my prediction at least is that we find a way to quote-unquote disconnect the Witness from the Traveler, right? We essentially free the Traveler. At this point, the destination opens up for us, right? And when the destination opens up, all of a sudden we have kind of the equivalent of the Taken War Act of the Taken King expansion, where a bunch of additional quests will appear that aren't technically in the main campaign, but they're the post-campaign pre-raid questing arc, right? Where you go around the different bits and pieces and you experience the story. And as a result, the campaign is only really a part of it all. And then when you do finally complete those, you are geared up and you are ready for the raid. And at that point, we get the raid itself and then the final mission to cap it off. If that's what we consider the whole story to be, which would be, maybe it's a bit of a dream on my end of things, maybe it's a bit naive, but yeah, if that is the way that the structure of it all works out, then I think that that is a way of telling potentially a really good self-contained story. Mm-hmm. For years, we went ahead and talked about how the Taken King and Oryx was really the best villain story in Destiny. And, for the longest time, rightly so. I think it's only honestly topped by Savathûn, but the reason why everything works out the way it does for the Taken King expansion is because Oryx was the focus the whole time, We defeated him in the story, but he wasn't really dead, and we all knew that because we'd done Crota. We knew how Hive Throne Worlds worked, and that Oryx was still technically around and his influence was still there. But we had the aftermath and the effect of him having basically arrived in the system and said, hey, here's the Taken. We had to purge them from Mars and Venus and Earth, and you had all these interesting missions that you did in that process that were wild and unique as a result. I mean, going inside the Vault of Glass is probably one of my favorite examples. Yeah, the Taken making their way into the Black Garden is another good one. Like, all of these different examples of great story content came from that Taken War arc, and it's really unique in that respect because I think it was one of the first times in a long while that Destiny's actually done that. And to be brutally honest, even Witch Queen didn't do that. Granted, Witch Queen had a great story beforehand with Savathûn, which was fed in through the seasons, and the actual campaign itself, I think, stood on its own 2 feet. But if they're looking to tell a cohesive story, about a villain entirely like that, I think that taking that Taken King approach is a very solid way of doing it. Now, again, to be clear, that's a bit of a pipe dream. It's a bit of a hope, because we don't know what's between the raid and the end of the campaign. We know there will be post-campaign questing, because that's inevitable. We don't know how solidly it links together. My hope would be that it's essentially like a combination of the Taken King and Forsaken, in the sense that, you know, the world of Forsaken evolved around you, and granted, I'm twisting it a bit because the Dreaming City evolved after the raid, but imagine that, you know? Imagine the Pale Heart evolving when you complete the campaign mission, the final campaign mission, that is, and then it's like, hey, you've opened up the post-campaign questing to do this stuff in the raid, the destination becomes dynamic, you learn new things, you get more context, you understand more about the Witness, and then, finally, the raid comes and you take the Witness on for good. You know, that, I think, would be the way to do it. At that point, you have a 3-act structure, and Act 1 is the campaign. And if that works, and if everything that we've learned about the Witness in the seasons prior is pulled in appropriately, if people can get that full context, I think it'll work. But I won't lie, just based purely on seeing the numbers, it is worrying. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, 7 missions are still 7 missions, or 7 plus the 1. And yeah, like you said, there's a lot of players. We all assume that everyone raids. There's a lot of players who don't play the raid and don't have 5 other friends to play this extremely mind-punishingly difficult activity on contest mode. And even after, obviously it's a lot easier, but you know, getting people together, it's not something that everyone has access to. But yeah, I definitely think I can see a lot of inspiration they've taken from Forsaken as far as this big, like, as far as it just being this kind of like dreamland, or first off, as far as also being this kind of giant monolith, the Witness monolith in the middle, and how it will kind of evolve. And they did similar things with Beyond Light, how after the space station crashes, you can kind of see the ruins. And then what was it in the Throne World? The pyramid like activates, and you see after the raid's completed, there's a evolution of the world. I think, and definitely from what they've said, the Pale Heart is going to transform once you get in there, and then once you beat the campaign, and then probably after the raid, once you beat the Witness, it's all going to open up and change. But yeah, you can see definitely a lot of similarities there. I think raids is another question as well. Like, obviously with that expansion, does this mean that this final shape Witness raid is the last raid? Probably not. Again, raids are a huge undertaking, but I would imagine we'll probably see another raid at some point in the future, but could be a while.
Yeah, they actually posed this question to Joe Blackburn recently in an interview, and his answer was pretty cagey, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. Because the seasons, it's not seasons, the episodes rather, come with a dungeon key, which means, you know, at some point during the year we are getting dungeons. Yeah, there's 2. But there's nothing that was stated about raids. No. So it's a very interesting question at that. You know, it doesn't really have many answers at this moment in time.
Reprised raids as well, like as far as raids to come back, there is obviously
Wrath of the Machine, and that's it.
But then there's the there's the Destiny 2 raids that are vaulted, like Leviathan, Scourge, Crown, Eater, and Spire. Obviously Eater and Spire being raid layers, but still pretty good raid experiences. Especially Eater, I quite like Eater of Worlds. But that's also stuff that they can just bring back out of the vault, reprise raids, but Wrath would be the main one. But obviously I would assume Wrath the whole big thing is it would make sense to come alongside with Siva, which I could also see them doing maybe in an episode or even an expansion. I could see them like wanting to do Siva properly and have a little spin-off, or, you know, they can make, I'm sure you would know, they could come up with any narrative to make it make sense of, you know, we've got we've discovered how to turn Siva friendly, or we've discovered how to use Siva in a different way, or some other enemy's got hold of Siva. But I think that could be a thing. It's definitely just, you know, something they've got in the back pocket that would make players interested. But yeah, we're getting 2 dungeons in the year of Final Shape, so between episodes 1 and 3.